I'm J. Michael Bostwick, professor of psychiatry here at Mayo Clinic. The article that we'll be talking about is called "The Limits of Acceptable Biological Variation in Elite Athletes. Should Sex Ambiguity be Treated Differently from Other Advantageous Genetic Traits?" My co-author is Michael J. Joyner, and the article will be appearing in the June edition of Mayo Clinic Proceedings. This article is timed for the Olympics, and that's very deliberate. The article proceeds from the story of Caster Semenya, who is a South African female athlete who was disbarred from competition for about 10 months after she won the 800-meter race at the World Championships in Berlin in 2009. The reason that she was disbarred was because she looked too much like a man. And she had never identified as a man. She had never been treated as a man. But certain other athletes thought that she was too masculine appearing to be in the female race. So they complained, and an investigation was launched. There's a long history of trying to tease out from elite athletes, males who might be masquerading as females. There's never been anybody found, but it's been a confusing matter because there really is no hard and fast definition of what constitutes a male and what constitutes a female. Nature is diverse, and there are variations of all kinds that can occur, and it becomes a real challenge when we have an athletic system that's set up on a binary understanding of sex, which is that you are either a man or a woman. Now, in the case of Ms. Semenya, she is being allowed to compete as a woman, and that was after a secret investigation launched by the International Association of Athletic Federations. The findings have not been released. The diagnosis that she may or may not have has not been released either. She continues to look, in many respects, like a man in certain aspects of her physiognomy that are traditionally associated with men. But she'll be competing as a woman. This article explores genetic variation and how that plays out in professional athletics or in high-powered amateur athletics. There's a notion very old of fairness, that somehow Olympics should be fair for all potential contenders. Indeed, there are stories from the early Olympics that it was somehow ungentlemanly, and only men were involved, to prepare for the games in any way, because that would somehow, with the training, make it less fair. The premise of this article is that while certainly there is some gender/sexual ambiguity to Caster Semenya, her advantage is conceptually no different than the advantage of many other athletes. For example, what if we wouldn't allow Michael Phelps to participate as a swimmer because his arms are too long and his joints are too lax? What if we wouldn't allow certain athletes, particularly in long-distance endurance events on skis, to participate because they have a high oxygen carrying capacity? What if we got rid of Ian Thorpe, another swimmer, because his feet are too big and they act like flippers? What if we took men who have high levels of testosterone and threw them out because they were overly endowed? The notion that somehow elite athletes are like the rest of us seems to me to be ridiculous, frankly. We may aspire to be like them, but more likely we're going to be their fan and be amazed at what they can do with attributes that we don't personally possess. If you get to see Caster Semenya, compare her to some of her elite colleagues whose sex has not been questioned. Because at least to my eye, I can find photographs of women who look equally muscular and who look equally masculine, as it were. And they've been running and they've been doing well. Obviously the stakes are higher, or at least the interest is greater when you're talking about men and women and that divide. But part of the point of the article is that the divide itself is really not very clear. Those who've considered what would happen if Caster Semenya were forced to run as a man have shown that she would never be competitive at any high level, and probably not even at a low level. There are rumors again that part of her rehabilitation has involved suppressing her testosterone into the normal female range. But even if you look at ranges for testosterone, progesterone and estrogen, they're highly variable based on time of life, based on time of cycle, based on all kinds of factors. So it becomes really problematic to make a hormonal level the reason why you include someone or not. Another controversy that comes to mind, if you look at gymnasts, perhaps we should get rid of all the ones that are too small or too young. Certainly there was a great controversy in the last Olympics about China and the possibility that they were putting athletes in who were below the limit to make sure they were small and lithe and able to fling themselves through the air in a way that normal adults cannot. You can see where this is going. The argument that this article makes, and it's mostly to get you really thinking about it, is that fairness is probably not defined in terms of everyone being equal. The reality is that athletics requires a great deal of practice and exercise, but also certain athletic endowments that make it possible for that athlete to achieve at a high level. We don't think this way very often because it doesn't involve something as frightening and challenging as sex and gender, but I think we really should, and I think that Caster Semenya's difference is just one among many, many differences that are prevalent throughout elite athletic competition. The issue of figuring out who's a man and who's a woman is really a development of contemporary times. In the ancient Olympics, everybody knew who the men were because everybody was competing in the nude. So the parts were right out there visible to be seen. There were very few women, and they were in equestrian events, and they were allowed to drive chariots and such. But otherwise, women were not a part of the Olympics in ancient times. In modern times, the first women started competing in 1912. By the late 20s, there were many, many women who were involved in a whole variety of sports, and we keep adding sports even to the present time for women to compete parallel to men. There were questionable women competing as early as the 1930s. There's a famous case from the Hitler Olympic Games, so-called the 1936 Olympics, in which two American women both appeared rather masculine, and one accused the other of being a man. This led to a strip search of that person who'd been accused, just literally take her clothes off and people staring at her genitals, and they concluded that she was in fact a woman. Ironically, when the accuser died, she turned out to have ambiguous genitalia herself. Through the ensuing years, things heated up in the 1960s. There began to be developed various biological tests that professed to show who was a man and who was a woman. Also, for people who looked like what they were supposed to look like, they weren't tested, even though they also could have aberrant chromosomes, strange things going on that simply were not visible. So you can see where this is going on some level. It was all about looking at someone, deciding based on what you thought they ought to look like, whether they had a right to compete as a man or a woman. Many women have spoken of how humiliating it was to be subjected to the nude parade, where basically they were forced to strip and walk in front of typically a bunch of men who would decide based on how they looked whether they were male or not. Again, this has been an ongoing struggle. The Caster Semenya story is the latest in a long string of issues, and at this point many feminist writers understand this as being actually a sexist attempt to keep women in line. It is interesting that in the guidelines from the International Olympic Committee and the IAAF, there is no definition for what a man is, but there's a lot of fuss and concern about what a woman is. From a cultural standpoint, that's fascinating, that basically perhaps in the most egregious caricature, we'd want a Pan-American stewardess from 1962 putting on her athletic shorts and running around in high-heeled sneakers so we could be sure that she was a woman. I hope you'll read the article, and I hope that it will cause you to watch the Summer Games in a different way. Maybe you'll see things differently, maybe you'll see things you never saw before, maybe you'll be challenged to really wonder how it is that these people are there being elite athletes.
We hope you benefited from this presentation based on the content of Mayo Clinic Proceedings. Our journal's mission is to promote the best interests of patients by advancing the knowledge and professionalism of the physician community. If you're interested in more information about Mayo Clinic Proceedings, visit our website at www.mayoclinicproceedings.org. There you will find additional videos on our YouTube channel, and you can follow us on Twitter. For more information on healthcare at Mayo Clinic, please visit www.mayoclinic.org. This video content is copyrighted by Mayo Foundation for Medical Education and Research.